Now, you may have already planted your fall garden, and you may be looking at it thinking, what is the deal? When is my fall garden really going to take off? Well, we're going to try and give you a little bit of insight into that today because it can be frustrating. We're going to talk about when your fall garden will actually thrive right here on the Backyard Gardens podcast.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Welcome to the Backyard Gardens podcast, where we talk about all things gardening. We are your hosts, Ben in Batavia, and you can find me gardening in the country.
And you'll find me gardening in the city. Get ready as we dig deep into this
wonderful world of gardening, where we learn to grow and grow for change. All right, everybody, if you're new to the show, thank you for joining this beautiful podcast we have all about backyard gardening. And if you'd like to support the show, because we are a listener-supported show, you can check us out on Patreon. Link is down below, amongst other ways to help. But you will get 2 extra episodes a month, and you can come check us out on YouTube and help support us. So all you got to do is like and subscribe on that and enjoy some of our content. But let's get on to the regularly scheduled program with the dinging.
This is my new signal for the ding. It's also a snake signal. All right.
Yeah, that is the snake signal. It reminds me of Cobra Kai. We've been watching that with my son. Mm-hmm. He loves it. Anyways, shameless plug for that show. Fall gardening can be stressful, can it?
It can. But I have a new attitude.
You do? You have a new outlook on life?
No, I just have a new attitude for the moment.
For today's show, everybody, I'm going to kick my feet back and let Batavia share her new outlook with us. No. I know that for me, because it's so hot, if you're new to the show and you don't know, I'm in zone 8A and Batavia is in
6A as in apple.
You'll have to go back to...
Shout out to... Yeah, all the old timers for the podcast that remember the episode where I said a different thing and made a 6A out of myself.
Yeah. You were very hell-bent on that, but anyways. So it's so hot here that things will struggle at first, and it never ceases to amaze me that there's like this turning point within the year that can kind of help with that, that helps turn the garden around. And it's shocking to me because you watch things grow all summer and they grow, you know what I mean? And they thrive, and there's stuff that loves the heat, stuff that doesn't like it so much, but.
And then you have the moment where kind of that warm weather and cool weather kind of meet.
Yep.
Right. And so I haven't pinpointed the when on my calendar that transition happens, that switch happens. But a surefire sign is when my heat-loving crops are kind of like crying for mercy.
Yeah.
Like that's the beginning of the shift, right? Because guess what? They're no longer thriving, and it's time for, a new show in town.
Once you start...
Fall crops, cool weather crops.
Once you start harvesting only green tomatoes, maybe... I think that's perhaps the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think as you walk past pepper plants, your jalapenos, and you just see for the last week the same 6 red jalapenos.
Yeah.
Right? Like nothing else is changing colors. Nothing else is maturing further.
Wait, you let your jalapenos go red?
I try to, especially if I'm making like a particular dish, not all of them. Like if I do cowboy candy or something, I want a mixture of green and a few red in there.
Okay.
So I'll let them go red.
Yeah, I don't ever let mine go red. It's kind of weird.
Well, that is the sign of a mature pepper.
Is it? Or is it the corking on the pepper?
Oh, ooh. I think corking, isn't it a delicacy or something? Like, don't people pay big bucks?
No. No, the cork. You know what the corking is, right?
It's the a sign of ripeness.
The little lines that come up in the pepper, like the texture. I don't know how to describe it.
I know what it is. I thought you were trying to ask me if I knew why it happens.
Oh, no. I don't know why it happens. I know that when I pick my green jalapenos that are corked, they're at like the perfect heat for me. And then the other thing too, which kind of made me start doing that, is when I buy jalapenos from the store, they're never red.
Yeah.
So I kind of I took one from El Paso and said, you know what, I'm gonna roll with it. So, and I get more peppers.
Yeah, I think though that. So I don't have any history on originally all of the peppers were red. But I still believe that the idea, because a lot of us have come to know, these peppers as green, and you're going to get them off the plant sooner. I mean, so farmers are going to be able to harvest green jalapenos before they harvest red.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But we are not here to talk about jalapeno peppers. That is actually the exact opposite thing that we're here to talk about. But we digress as usual.
Yeah, man, I was watching you, and I'm like, I'm going to jump in here. Like, if you're going to take me on this ride, I'm going, man.
I opened the door.
I got my seatbelt on and my helmet, but I'm going.
But so we're going to kind of break down. We're going to break down when your garden's going to thrive, but I think we're also going to end up talking about how we can get it to thrive maybe a little bit earlier and just kind of get you there. We'll try and give you a little bit, or at least I will, and hopefully Batavia will go on that ride. She'll put her seatbelt on for that ride too, and we can kind of get everybody there just a little bit earlier. But I think it's really dependent on the zones you're in, the weather of where you live. I think you're like in when I lived in zone 6 and you live in zone 6, it was a much faster and harder turn towards the fall season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, in North Carolina, we only have 2 seasons really, summer and winter. So, and it really does live up to that standard. Well, some people say that, and some people say we have 19 seasons, but I go by the 2 seasons.
In this moment and in the Midwest for me, and I'll just call Illinois in particular and kind of bordering states, like I may change my mind on this, but in this moment I feel like the kind of summer into fall is more gradual. And I say that because I was just talking about this on a video, like my melons we're just starting to climb the trellis, and this is like at the beginning of August. And so while in my zone now, and I've double checked this, my average first frost date is November the 1st versus a couple of days earlier. But it's not like as of November the 1st, there's a chance of frost and it's been super hot all the way up until that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, mid-September, it could go either way. Your weather is cooling down. You'll still get some 90-degree days every now and again, but those night temps are starting to get cooler. So by the time you get to, again, that's gradually happening. By the time you get to October and get into that first frost, I think that's that's the steep downhill
for you.
Like that thing turns over. Yeah. So it goes from, you get that average, run across that average frost date, and the temps could be 30s, 40s for the next week or two. So that cold, once it hits.
Yeah, and see, for us, it's quite the opposite. Those 90-degree days will just last and last, and then once we start getting around our first frost date, I mean, we definitely get a frost, but we can rebound. Like, we'll get a frost, and then the next week it'll be almost summer again. Next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then we'll get a frost. And, so we can go back and forth and really, like I like to call it, it's either one or two things, a heartbreak zone or the yo-yo season. So, we deal with that a lot. But once we get into winter, our temperatures, we'll definitely get into the freezing temperatures at night. But we can easily rebound into the 50s, 60s, and at some point even the 70s during the week, during the week, because on the weekends, it's only cold, but during the week it's not. But we'll kind of stay within that zone and range. But see, that's kind of the issue is these wild temperature fluctuations. And that's what makes it kind of difficult for us. But it also helps me too, because I can save a lot more seeds. So that kind of helps me in that situation too. Yeah, because I've made my biennial plants think that they are in fact in their second year. Tricks on you, Mr. Plant. I got you. So
I do think though, when it comes to that weather, regardless of your zone number, if you're in a place, it's going to be the lower zones. But if you're in a place where you're able to grow, and maybe they don't thrive, but you're able to grow those cooler weather crops throughout the summer or very late into the spring and early summer, if you're in a place like that, then I'll say that your fall weather is probably, kind of on that mild side too. Yeah. So as an example, my, I'm going to say kale, because I there's only so many opportunities to talk about my beloved collards. So my kale, grows and it's pretty stagnant, but it grows throughout the growing season. So I planted it in April, May, June, July, August, September. The plants are still just fine. Yeah. Harvesting leaves and so on. There's not a lot of new growth, right? And so in that instance, I don't have as much of a struggle when I put out new plants in the fall with that yo-yoing heat. Right, because they've already lived through 70, 80, 90 degree weather, throughout the summer. Now, I'm still not at the point of thriving when we're there. However, that's an indicator to me that these crops are going to be okay. Right.
But why? There's two things. Well, so I'm going to talk about one thing, and then I'm going to actually talk about the other. So the first thing, I'm going to talk about some weather differences and something that shocked me. I remember when I was younger, I dated a young lady from, I was much younger, Kansas. And she used to tell me stories. So we started dating around winter time. And she would tell me that, it would be so cold there that they would have to boil water and put it in the bathtubs and stuff like that just to kind of get the temperature up. And I remember being surprised by that. But then in the same breath, she would tell me that in the summertime, it would easily break 100 degrees, high 90s, and it'd be sweltering heat. And it just shocked me because it's man, that is total opposites. You're talking about super cold and super, super hot in these within a 6-month span. And it's just, it's kind of shocking to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's, because if you didn't have any experience with any other places besides where you live, your natural inclination could be, if it gets that cold, generally speaking, the weather is always on the colder side. So in summer, you'd think, it's not super hot there, right? How can you get that cold and then go on the other end of the spectrum and, get that hot?
Well, and to be fair, this was in the beginning of readily accessed internet. Internet had been out for a while, but it wasn't it was very common to go to somebody's house and there would not be an internet connection there. We have moved past AOL at that point. Go ahead.
Were you all still traveling through horse and buggy?
Look, my point. No. My point was especially when you're young and you get your first, you're moving out into your first houses or whatever. You can't afford that stuff. Now you have to have it. Yeah. But it was like you said though. I always thought that the weather was either really hot if you went north or south, and really cold if you went north. And there was no difference because the weather where I lived was the weather everywhere in my mind because I didn't know any better. Now it's different. Now, think about doing this podcast. I don't know. Let's just pick a number. 20 years ago, we'd be having a totally different conversation. I'd be sitting here shocked at what some of the stuff you tell me.
Yeah. You'd be like, what voodoo do you speak of? You say you want to have vegetables in your garden in November, right?
Because even in North Carolina, you would still, it's not openly, it's not really super common to plant in the winter like I do. So, I mean, collards, yes, but you know, all the other stuff that I plant. So it's kind of like, it is like you said, it's like voodoo, like what? But now the information age is upon us. So,
yeah, that's a part of the reason why I think I do versus I don't know for sure for you, but part of the reason why I do what I do and the ways that I do it as far as sharing kind of my garden and my gardening experience. And one of the reasons I love talking on this show, because sometimes even now you still don't know what's possible unless someone else has done it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to botch the whole Roger, what's his name, with the 4-minute mile, you know, how many people had tried and failed. And then after he hit the 4-minute mile, how many people since then, you know, thousands, if not tens of thousands, you know. And so when you look at kind of the way and the access we have to gardening now, and you see someone like you, right, in North Carolina with a basket full of root vegetables, you know, heading into Christmas, like, that's boss, man, you know? And so not only does that say something about the folks that live in North Carolina or near that area, I think it also makes a note in anyone's head that gardens, like, I wonder how much I can push the envelope in my area.
I've seen videos of people in Chicago that get full harvest throughout the entire winter. Now, there's a little bit more to what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, but I've definitely seen it, which is promising when you see, it's just like you said, when you see that now you have a benchmark in which you can strive for. Yep. And that's pretty cool. I like that.
I don't know which came first, the cart or the horse. I don't know if I had the desire
The horse
first,
definitely came first.
And I ran across, or chicken or egg, I came across a Chicago gardener and his channel, and he was doing all kinds of wonderful things when it comes to extending his season. Or if I saw what he did and said, you know, hold on now, it could be two of us.
Yeah.
But either way, you know, I think that being able to kind of look at what you can do in fall is just the beginning of it. You know, before we even get into winter, and we won't really talk about winter in this series or this episode in particular, but 20 years ago, it would have been like, why bother? You know, like, why would you try to plant something as fall comes around and all it's going to do is die, you know, in a month or two? Yeah. But that's not how this works.
Well, and you know,
right? It doesn't have to work that way. Let me say it that way.
If you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you know that my
I have.
You have? Oh, okay, cool. So my grandfather was a big time gardener, and it's where I draw a lot of my knowledge and inspiration from. But I remember in the wintertime, I mean, he rolled the doors up and he sat in the house and, you know, I just did a YouTube video where I kind of talked about this, but he started seeds in his house in the wintertime, which, and this is before I was alive, but in the 70s and 60s, that's a big damn deal to start seeds in your house. That wasn't like, let me go get a $10 LED light that draws, you know, 25 cents worth of power a week. You know, this was a full setup that the man had, but in the wintertime, he didn't do it. Now, if he knew that there was a benchmark in which to set, he may have done that, but he didn't know that. You know, it's an interesting concept.
I'm trying to think back. It could have been 10 years ago, maybe even, you know, less time than that I realized that home gardeners were doing that. Yeah. All the time before then, it just never occurred to me.
Starting seeds?
Starting seeds indoors. I'd see seed packets in the stores. I was still just always buying transplants then, but even the seed packets that I walked past, I guess in my mind, I just assumed that it would have been a term I didn't know then, but that they were direct sowing those. It never occurred to me that, you know.
That's what I thought originally too. Because, you know, when I started sowing seeds too, back when the Model T Ford was out, the LEDs were not, you know, the LED light bulb was, I think the LED Christmas bulbs had just come out, and they were, you know, I mean, anybody who's bought an LED Christmas bulb is like, they were terrible, but they were just starting to come out, and they were like outrageously expensive. So for me to see that before I really started digging and learning about all of this stuff and finding out that, like, hey, I can use like a regular light bulb, which even back in my grandfather's day, you couldn't use a regular incandescent light bulb. They didn't work like that. So I was the same way. I was like, oh, these fools are just out there sticking tomato seeds right in the ground, which I wasn't interested in at all because I knew enough to know that like I would never get a harvest. But, and the other thing that I'm...
Well. So I do have...
I know.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
And again, we're on, this is fall, but for the record, I do have, and many people have, volunteer tomatoes, which is just from a seed that was in the ground. Now, I'm not gonna stock up my pantry with tomato sauce from those volunteers, and it's a great example of the size that they get. Because they started basically from seed, by the time the temperature warmed up enough for that seed to germinate and so on. It's just not satisfactory when it comes to the amount, the potential the plant could have if you gave it that head start.
Right. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about...
It's a good segue, though.
I wanted to talk... You use the word thrive, and we've talked about that, periodically throughout this, what we're going to call the intro. Thriving is when you look at your fall plants and you see fresh, new, green growth, health. You know what I mean? Not the, constant, I don't want to call it yellowing, but it could be that, or the struggling of plants in the heat, stuff like that. Like at some point, you're going to end up walking outside and seeing like, oh, my lettuce has got nice, crisp, plump leaves. You're going to start seeing that. And that's what we're referring to when we talk about the thriving of the, the fall crops in the fall garden. So
it's,
go ahead.
It can be really eye-opening, so I'd say maybe a quarter of the time I've been gardening. So, excuse me, just a handful of years have I seen kind of all of the plants that I grow in their most ideal growing time. Yeah. Right. So it's not my place to comment, right, when I see things online. And I've looked back on some things I've posted. I've looked back on some videos even that I've shared where I am showing and beaming at a plant. And it's not that it's not healthy. There's been a bunch of that. It's not that it's not healthy, but it's, lettuce in July. Right. And you can look at the difference between a lettuce plant in July and in my garden in a lettuce plant in April. Yeah. Or a lettuce plant in November. Right. And so while I actually had recently shared a post, it's like, it ain't always pretty. You know what I'm saying? So I pulled some things out of my garden that aren't pretty. Right. And have still been edible and still been delicious. But what I'm talking about is vegetables that are planted in a time where they are going to be most successful. They have an opportunity to thrive, and to be able to see that juxtaposed to something that you push the envelope too much, it's something to be said when you kind of that light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, this is what this is supposed to look like.
Yeah. You're not supposed to see some like shriveled up, like hurting ass leaves. Like you're supposed to see something like it's, and it's like your tomatoes. Like for me, May and June is like peak, pretty, beautiful growth, happy. And then from that point on, July, August, September, it's like, ugh, this is a tomato plant. You know what I mean? So is it okay if I go ahead and just give that moment in which it thrives?
Absolutely.
So I would say absolute thriving for a fall, and feel free to debate me on this if you'd like, but I think it's going to be when you're getting your temperatures at night, and I'm going to get real specific and know that there's about a 5-degree temperature swing either way, but I'm just going to put it on a number. I think that it's about 35 degrees at night and about 50 to 55 degrees during the day. And that's when you're really going to start seeing it. What do you think?
I'll meet you there with the 5-degree sway. Yeah. I haven't studied it long enough to really say no, but my instinct said something like, in response to what you said, because I didn't have time to formulate my own original thought on this, was something more like 40s as a low, definitely 50s as a high. Because once you get into the 60-degree Fahrenheit temps, man, that sun could be beaten down. It could be a lot warmer than what you think. Yeah. And the garden responds to that. So I think that that's kind of, that sweet spot. So to your thriving explanation. Yeah, I could see it.
So the reason,
and again, we ain't talking about tomatoes and peppers.
No,
folks,
here. Let me run through the list real quick: lettuce, collards, kale, broccolis, cauliflowers, cabbages, turnips, spinach. All these are all the ones that we're talking about. You know what I mean? Now, I do want to say why I gave that temperature swing and why I went in so low, and that is because 30 degrees doesn't bother any of these plants that we just mentioned. None of them. As a matter of fact, listen to me, there are people out there that swear that some plants get sweeter once they get kissed by a little bit of frost. So that 30 degrees is that sweet point. Haha, you see what I did there?
Yeah, I see it. I'm not crazy about it. Remind me to tell you about the botched story of the sweeter greens test that I screwed the pooch on.
Well, let's do it.
I'll tell you that another day, though.
No, I'm going to hear it now.
Well, I mean, I was building up to it, so when I actually told the story, it was like womp, womp, womp. People really wouldn't notice. So I was monitoring my weather. This is last fall. And my greens, specifically kale greens, curly kale, and collards, were in my garden through almost all of December.
Yeah.
Right. So we got our first frost like the first week of November. And so I knew it was coming, and I harvested, let's call it November the 3rd was the night that the temps dipped down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So I harvested a bunch, 6-10 leaves of each, like on November the 2nd.
Right.
And then I came back in and said, all right, November the 3rd, they've been kissed by frost. I said, no, let's wait longer. Let's have them like repeatedly kissed, right? Like completely making out. And so I came back in like, the 4th or 5th or 6th or something like that, a few days later to harvest more. I mean, we had the repeated, above freezing and below and so on.
Your kale went to second base with the cold?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And so then I harvested the next batch. And then something happened. I don't know what, but I only ended up being able to cook the second batch and not those first leaves. And so I'm like, you missed there's no more chance for them, to go back to their, virgin state. So I'm going to try it again if the weather aligns, and I'm available to do it. I think it'd be interesting. I had a whole skit plan where I was going to, cook the greens. I was going to have like 4 different pots cooking. Kale in one pre-kiss, collards in another pre-kiss, and then kale in one post-kiss, collards in another post-kiss. I welcome you all to try that. If you're up for it, let us know.
I think you might have to do it. You might have to eat it raw to get a good.
Oh, you think?
Yeah, I think that might be the best way to it's so easy. You take a bite and then you go cook the rest. So.
Yeah, you are a genius. It never, ever, 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 ever occurred to me.
I've never been accused of being a genius. I am truly blushing right now. Thank you. As
it relates to this particular, obviously.
No, it's for everything.
No, but it makes so much more sense when you think about all of what I would do to cook those things down. Yeah. Right? All right, that's much easier to manage too.
To go out there and take a bite. Take a bite. Yeah, I would be interested.
Leonard? Add it to my calendar. Yeah. New average first frost date is November the 1st.
He probably put it on my calendar.
Yeah.
That would be a good
2022, Leonard. 2022.
That would probably be a good test for most people to do as well. You know what I mean? Like, just pull a little piece off and bite it. What's one leaf?
Or, I think a good example is like, a carrot is much more obvious to taste like, oh, this is sweet. I actually had a sweet cucumber, getting again off topic. I had a sweet cucumber earlier in the season, and I was just like, whoosh. Yeah. We know the difference between, homegrown cucumbers and then store-bought, but this is actually sweet, which is something pretty interesting. But this is also a good example of, like, those are moments of, if it's really true, that's thriving, when it basically changes the taste profile of the vegetable, unless you don't like sweet things. I don't think it's sugary sweet, but.
Well, and I think we definitely just said when it'll thrive, but I think the next logical place to go would be, how can we maybe, bump that up by a couple weeks? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'll let you take a stab at it because my idea is pretty simple and straightforward. So maybe you have some other genius input.
Well, I mean, I have a number of ideas, and it's just basically science-based, but I mean, one of them is obviously shade cloth. You know what I mean? Throw a shade cloth over it, keep it cooler in the daytime. You know what I mean? So I don't think, I mean, and again, this can be different for everybody's area, but for my area, that may only add a week onto the front side. You know what I mean? But in your area, you might be able to go a month. You know what I mean? Because it's a lot easier to cool something down from 75 to 65 than it is to go from 95 to 65 or 85 to 65.
And in that example, I wouldn't have described it as, I get where you're at, but I wouldn't have described it as speeding it up. But what you definitely are doing is, unless you're keeping it on, right? Like that temperature remains much lower, right? You get there sooner. But you also are protecting it from that, the struggle that it could go through if it gets too hot. You know, like plants can be in distress.
Yeah.
Right. You know, so if you're able to protect it, so to speak, that means that's less for that plant to bounce back from and more on its road to, you know, hip hop hooray, it's cooler weather.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's
So I can get with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, the one way that you can, and I mean, even when it starts to get cooler, you can still leave that shade cloth on and just keep that general temperature cooler during the daytime, and it would just prolong it and help it. So, I mean, that's kind of an obvious answer. Another one, or do you want to give yours?
No, because I didn't think that was obvious. So I'm interested in other things that you have on your mind that I didn't think of.
So another one would be, you know, look at the kind of mulch you're using. You know, we don't ever, I don't think we've ever recommended a type of mulch one way or the other. But Batavia and I were kind of talking about this on a totally different subject earlier. But if you have like a really dark colored mulch, you can switch it out with something light colored, and then that will help with, you know, reflecting the light and not absorbing that heat during the day. So, you know, and then couple that with watering and stuff like that, and you can really dramatically lower the temperature. Just by doing those two things, you can dramatically lower the temperature around your plants and in your plants. So that water from that mulch will continue to evaporate during the day. And because a lot of the times, you know, the old saying is, and I kind of live by it, is you don't harvest your greens in the middle of the day. You always get them in the morning when they're full of that water. So if you've watered and your mulch is still damp, then it's releasing it's evaporating around your plants, and then the pores of the plants can be soaking up that water and help to continuously plump in the leaves of it. So, you know, and as well as keeping it cool at the same time, because that cool air, as you get those cool fall breezes, remember, we're only talking about fall here. We're not talking about spring. So as those cool fall breezes come, you know, I don't know anybody that gets a warm fall breeze. I could be wrong. There may be somebody out there, but, you know, it'll help cool that plant even more.
I was trying to go back and look. I think it's around in September. It's hard for me to say, but I'm going to call it around 1 o'clock. Maybe let's call it noon. So I have 2 garden beds in my backyard garden that throughout the summer, they're almost completely shaded until around noon during the day.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is a space. And I've grown a lot of things there. And I'm thinking back, I'm trying to remember how many summer crops are grown there, like true summer crops, but that's a different conversation. But so this is the second one that I came up with. The first one I'll still hold. If we're only talking about fall and we're not necessarily saying, all right, hold on, and you want to make sure you're still growing in January, a shadier spot in your garden, to your point about shade cloth, right? Like there's some people obviously that have kind of an open garden space, open fields, open rows and things where it's all sun beating down. But many of us don't, right? You have structures and things that create shade. And so this is an opportunity for that to benefit you.
But we all have shade within our garden. If you plant behind a taller plant, then you can create that shade. So there goes another portion. I mean, that's exactly right. I just did a video where I was walking through my garden, kind of talking about what my plan was for fall. I mean, it's still hot as hell here, but there was a portion in which I talked about that a lot because I have 2 beds that get a lot of shade, but the difference is in the late summer, I will get enough sun in which to grow. I mean, I can grow there all winter, but things kind of struggle a little bit. But my lettuces, which are real heat sensitive, they actually do better there. So I can do a sowing of that, and then when it's harvested, be done with it. And I went to a little bit more depth in the video, and then pull it out and remulch it and everything. But, that's definitely something that you can do. And just realize, too, that like once the leaves start to fall, then you're going to get more sun as well. I definitely will get more sun when the leaves fall. So, and sometimes I look at it, I'm like, it can't happen soon enough, even though I don't want it to, but, it'll definitely help my situation.
So 2 things. Last month when you did the Start Fall Seeds with you on YouTube Live, under the Backyard Gardens TV, one of the questions I asked was around, one of the comments maybe, it was around seedlings that got leggy. Maybe it was in my head. I may not have said it, in the comments. But anywho, the note, when I plant seedlings in one of these beds, I'm talking about that basically at a point in the day, the sun starts to come out. That's very different than where I started some seeds inside of, in this case, the cage babies on the other side of the yard. And those seedlings, you get sun from 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's fighting for that sun.
Yeah.
Right. So that's my cautionary note when it comes to planting behind taller plants. It depends on kind of how that sun is approaching that planting area. So I could plant behind or in front of my tomato plants. Right. But that space gets sun most of the day. And so you're going to have those plants fight for it, as opposed to a space that, again, a point in time in the day, the sun starts to get out. It's shaded for the most part. And that same thing occurs if you have a taller plant in an area. So, I mean, I think that consider your space when you think about either 2 of those tips.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you said that, and I kind of, you may not agree with this and you may agree with it, I don't know. But I was thinking that one of the most important things for a gardener is to know their space. And when I say know their space, it's like know the tracking of the sun, know, the time, the seasons in which things start to change. And it all comes in time, and trial and error and different, testings of plantings and stuff like that. But I think that it's a big advantage for you to know what you're doing in that space and to understand, like, just think about it. Like, I'm going into the season knowing that half of my beds won't produce the way they should. Do you know how much stress that alleviates from me? Just knowing that, like, hey, from this point on, that's it, Yeah. And how I really found out was last year when I had my giant tomatoes, come about August, they really stopped producing, but they were looking really good. And it was because they just didn't get enough sun. They didn't get enough sun to actually produce the tomatoes. So I knew at that point that, hey, this is a situation that's unfolding here. And then over the winter, I noticed it again because one year I planted my Brussels sprouts in that bed. They didn't do good. And the next year I moved them over. And when I say I moved them over 4 feet. That's it. And it made a big difference in the way they grew.
Sure. I think the benefit, though, the bright side of as you go into
there is no bright side.
Oh, okay. For you, there isn't. Remember, I said I had a new attitude, a new outlook. So a part of, as we get into this cooler weather, right, because it's coming, even for the hottest of hot spaces, it's coming. A part of kind of knowing when your garden is thriving is, I'm going to call less watering is a moment of thriving for these, kind of fall plantings.
Yeah.
So the less you need to water, right? It's not to say that those plants don't need more, but the quick note, I had some late season annuals. I put one in the basket it came. I hung it up in the backyard, and the other was still in my garage. And I just kept on looking like, what happened to that? It's like it's drooping. And in the little bitty, 10-inch pot or however big those little pots come, the way that sun was baking that set of flowers compared to the one in my garage, I went inside and put my hand inside of the pot, still moist, still damp. So the idea of how much that water evaporates in the heat of the summer, compared to when you look at it's fall now, right? So there isn't a problem because you're watering less, right? If your plants still look healthy, it's just that weather has shifted.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another indicator.
That's a very good indicator of when it's going to thrive. I didn't even think about that.
I saw it when it clicked for you.
Yeah, because I definitely, like in the summertime, I water every other day. Deep waterings every day, and things dry out within that 48-hour period. But there will be a time where I'll cut it down to every 3 days, every 4 days, once a week. And then there may be a time where I only water once every 2 weeks in the wintertime, So yeah, that's a real good point. Now I have the greenhouse too, so that's a different story. Yeah. So that one suck up some water, but...
Speaking of water, though, depending on your area, because it's different for a lot of us, if you're starting to get more wet weather, right, so rain and heat, oh, boy, is it a recipe, Yeah. But if we're getting into a recipe for not so great, greatness in the garden, a lot of the summer plants struggle with all of that, kind of the back and forth with it. While every garden wants water, that kind of back and forth of a lot of heat and a lot of rain. But when you get into fall and you think about, so this is the key, the types of vegetables you're growing are different.
Yeah.
Right. So they can take a beating, if you will, when it comes to kind of that weather being cooler. Maybe there are more kind of downpours of rain. So that's, again, something to keep in mind and kind of buckle in and be okay with, because these are all moments that are going to be indicators that the garden's going to kind of enjoy the time and space it's heading into. And it's less work for the gardener. So how about that?
It's not that it can take a beating, it's that it will thrive in that. Ding. No, I mean, it's important. If there's one takeaway from this episode, just one of all of everything that we've said, it would be that when you get a freeze and if you've planted correctly and you see 32 degrees, it is not a time to freak out. It's actually a time to rejoice. Yeah. And I think that's the real takeaway that I want people to take away from this whole episode is, and because it's ingrained in our heads, because let's face it, we all grow in the warmth. I don't know of a gardener that only plants in the spring and fall unless they have to. But, and if they have to, they probably aren't really getting that cold weather. But, we know that, hey, don't put your tomatoes out too early. Don't let them get cold. Don't let your peppers get cold.
Yeah.
Wrap them up in a blanket, give them a little snuggie. But these plants are so different. Just like you said, and they grow differently. You harvest them differently. They thrive in different temperatures. You seed them differently. It's like a whole new, it's a whole new style of gardening, to say the least.
Yeah, I was looking for the video for the shameless plug I'm about to give myself. So if you go on YouTube under Betta, Betta Garden, there's a video I did last fall. It probably came out in November. It's called Garden Vegetables That Survive the Freezing Temps. right? So this is like over a course of like 5 or 6 or 7 days. And there are two things I want to note from that. I had, this is what the vegetables look like on the morning, and we got down to 32 degrees, right? Fahrenheit, and this is after repeated freezes, and you see some things that fared better than others, right? And so these are all cool weather crops that I planted or I had planted. But the thing I want to call out about that is the age of the plant. And depending on that plant also matters, right? So my older chard, as an example, which chard isn't like really, really hardy, but it can survive some cold temps. My older chard, meaning the plant was older, more specifically, the leaves were older. Boy, did it struggle, boy. It was like me trying to get up off the couch, after 3 hours of Netflix, on a Sunday afternoon. And compared to my younger, and I'm talking about younger, like absolutely like the size of your hand, probably. And so those plants were able to take that cold freeze, much better and respond to that. So I also noted there probably were only a couple of things that I had freshly planted, right? Versus things that had been in my garden that were cool weather crops for a longer period, going back to probably the summer or even the spring. So that again goes back to the age of the plants. There's no hard and fast rule saying older, everything struggles when it gets cold like that versus younger. It really depends on the vegetable itself. But these are again things that as you look to see what's thriving, and in cases where you don't feel like something's thriving, these are things to consider.
Yeah.
Right.
One of lettuce is the opposite. Those young lettuces, they can't handle it, but the older the lettuce, the better it is, Collards are the same way. I mean, I guess the one thing to think about is you just want your plants to get in the ground and get comfortable before you start getting that cold. Like, you don't want to look at the weather and be like, shit, it's gonna be 32 next week. Let me go put my seedlings out. Like, at that time, the ship has already sailed, which is why this series is coming out in the time that it is, because we want people to have enough time. I mean, it's as a podcaster and a video creator, YouTuber, whatever you want to call it, it's hard to be standing outside in the mid 90s talking about fall. You know what I mean? Like it's because they got to be a little bit forward thinking about it. And, as a gardener, you do too. So just moving forward that way can kind of help you.
Yeah, it's and I I think that just the spirit of the gardener as well, right? Like, it's a long road for me to get to, all right, I have enough peppers to make my favorite dish, right? I have enough, eggplant to make my favorite dish. And right in the middle of that moment, it's like, what are you planning for fall?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, gosh, can I look around here and, get comfortable? Well, no. Right? Like you should strive if this is your desire to have kind of this season garden, to do both. And it's been a struggle for me. Let's just be transparent. And back to your point of, kind of knowing your garden space, it's something that I have continued to learn year over year. And hey, guess what? If you expand it this year or you expand it last year, you got a new space to learn.
Yeah, you do.
Right? And that's okay, but that's a part of it.
Yeah.
So give yourself some grace is probably, I won't say the only thing I want you to take away from it, but as we go into fall, it can be challenging for different reasons, but it can be really, really cool. No pun intended.
No pun.
But give yourself some grace.
So, it has come to that part of the show, and if you're new to the show, the one thing is we give you a recipe of the day every week. But when we come back after that, I'm going to give you a heads up, Batavia. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you what fall plant vegetable you're really going to try and focus on and grow better. But first, I got to give you the recipe of the day. One of my favorite things about fall is wrapping up my tomatoes for the year. So every year about this time, we end up getting a lot of green tomatoes, and I'm going to give out my recipe again for fried green tomatoes. It is easy and delicious. So if you've never had a fried green tomato, stop what you're doing right now and slap yourself in the face because you're missing out on the best part of life. But I know you've had a fried green tomato. Don't slap yourself, Batavia. So all we do is we slice our tomatoes in slices, and I coat them in cornstarch. I just lightly coat them in cornstarch with a little bit of Old Bay seasoning. That's it. Old Bay seasoning. It's a crab seasoning. I know if you're from the coast of Maryland down to South Carolina, then you know that that's like a staple. So we'll put, I don't have exact measurements. Usually I get a paper plate. I put a pile of cornstarch on there, and then I'll put like 2 to 3 tablespoons of this on there. And then you coat them, and then I fill up a pan so they're halfway with oil. So I don't ever deep fry. I don't know why. I just kind of feel like it's better. It's probably not, but I do it that way. And then when I put them in, when they brown on one side, I flip them, and then I sprinkle a little bit more Old Bay on them. A variation that I've also used before is we eat a lot of Cajun food. So we use Slap Ya Mama seasoning, SLAPYA Mama. It's a Cajun seasoning. They have a hot and a mild one, so you can do that. And you fry it and you enjoy it. And we'll eat this throughout the fall season. As we clean up our gardens and everything and we're wrapping up, we will eat multiple, it's probably about 2 week period, 2 to 3 weeks. We'll eat more and more and more of these fried green tomatoes. That's it. Super easy.
It makes me happy. One quick question on that. As you slice the tomato and then you're going to put the cornstarch on it, you're putting the cornstarch directly onto the tomato.
Yeah.
No kind of no
liquid
egg wash or anything like that.
No.
Right.
And I do want to make a clarification. I said Old Bay, not Zatarain's. Okay? I do not support Zatarain's in any way. And I'm not affiliated with Old Bay, but I'd love to be because we eat them all the time. So not Zatarain's, Old Bay.
No substitution.
No.
So I'm going to answer your question, and then I have one unrelated to gardening, more about you and me, right?
Oh, no.
And I know you love that kind of conversation, so I have a question before we wrap up. I appreciate greatly you giving me a chance to think on which vegetable I'm really going to focus on, and my answer is going to be modified based on the time I have left.
You always have a stipulation for an answer every time.
So why? I mean, this is standard then.
Yeah,
it's spinach. It would have been beets, but my timing wasn't right. By that I mean I ended up sowing those seeds too late, I think. Right, but I didn't want to just give up on them, so I still sowed them. But I don't think that I scheduled that correctly. Spinach, I got right. Right. So I am going to look forward to enjoying probably a bunch of fresh spinach. I'd have to dedicate most of my garden to really harvest enough spinach to be worth its while for freezing or something like that. But spinach.
That's not a bad idea.
It's like the 4th year that I've been trying this. I was literally typing before, you came back with the recipe. It had occurred to me, it was an aha moment. Sometimes I believe I am brilliant. I believe that in every bit of my being. And then sometimes I have sometimes I have these moments where it's like, did you just close your eyes and go, the screen go black for a second? Spring mix. So I was typing is spinach really considered a fall vegetable? I know we plant it in the fall, but is it really considered a fall vegetable? Then I realized how much, in the stores you have spring mix. And it never occurred to me, spring as in this is when these vegetables thrive, these, like lettuce mixes and stuff. So anyhow, that was the moment where it's like, you can't be brilliant about everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, spinach. What about you?
So as usual, I have a couple. But one that I really want to hone in on is I'm really looking to get a good rutabaga harvest this year. Mm-hmm. I would rather have rutabagas than turnips in my garden. So either that or, like you said, spinach. That's been a tougher nut to crack. I did Brussels sprouts past couple years, and I'm doing them again. But I got a small harvest last year, so I'm fairly comfortable with like, hey, you may or may not get a harvest, but that's okay. But rutabaga is something that I really want to do because it's a lot longer growing time than turnips. So that's something I want to focus on.
Yeah, I sowed some seeds, and it takes them a while to germinate, and it takes them what are they, like 100-day crop? And so I would have put, actually, the order would have been rutabaga, as far as like things that I really hope do well in the fall. Rutabaga, turnips, beets, and then probably spinach, because I really know that I have a great chance at it in spring, and I can get that in and out of my garden. So I would have ordered it that way. But because of the turnaround time for those root crops, I'm just not convinced I've set myself up for the best turnout for that. Yeah. But we'll see, We will. What was the other question you had for me? So when you refer to the person that birthed you, do you call her mother, mom, like when you're talking to her, like you're calling her name, if you will?
That's incredibly private.
Yeah, it is.
Mama. I call her Mama. Or Ma. Either one, but yeah, Mama.
Yeah. So for me, it's Mama.
Oh, is it?
But I spell it MOMMA. Like if I'm typing
That's
something,
how I
like,
do it
I was
too.
talking to my mama. Which the thought came up when you said slap your mama. Is that it's on the brand? It's spelled MAMA. Anyway, you're just a good old country boy.
Yep, that's what I didn't think about it like that. Yeah. My dad calls his mom Mother. When she was alive, they all called her Mother. So, and she
I'm
was
not
my
from the
grandmother,
country, but
like
your grandmother,
very proper grandmother. So, yep.
I also, when I talk about my grandmother, when I speak about her to you as my grandmother, but I called her Mama too.
So everybody, I have this little 4-foot thing outside my door sniffing around. I can hear him, and I'm saying this so he can hear me. But I hope you guys have truly enjoyed this, and now you know what to expect from your fall garden, when it'll start. I want to say stop looking like crap, but really start to look good and thrive. Next week we'll be back with, to be exact, we'll be back with how long will your fall garden last? So we're going to kind of keep going on this discussion. That is a working title, of course. It is subject to change, so don't be fooled by that if you see a different title. But I hope you enjoy it. I hope you guys make some fried green tomatoes, man. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Please follow us on YouTube at Backyard Gardens TV,
Instagram at Backyard Gardens TV, over on our website, backyardgardenstv.com, and then we have Patreon at Backyard Gardens.
And don't forget to check out our links below to help the show. Thank you so much for joining us as we learn to grow and grow for change. Cut.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya!
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
All purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck!
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.